being online and joining us in our next discussion. I'm very lucky, if not privileged, to be joined by my colleagues here today. And Corey Lachowski from Red Hat to my right. We have Oscar De Leon from CDW, and we have Scott Perry from Shellman. Another member of our panel is probably on a call somewhere, and she will join us shortly. Here she is now, and on cue. Her name is Carla McKenna, and she is with Glyph. And actually, Glyph was our Slammy Award winner last night for the Security, Privacy, and Trust. And come on up, Carla, we'll just hand you a microphone.
Need to get a microphone.
Yeah, save some time. Thank you.
Sorry, I thought there was one more presentation.
Yeah, we did too, so.
Okay.
No worries.
All right.
Yep. Excuse me for walking in front of you. So, so today we're gonna, let's see if we got this here. So today we're gonna cover a number of subjects. We're gonna talk about what we call the mass decentralization of industry, right? And of course, IoT edge processing is key to that. We're gonna talk about, I wish I can see that, but some trends and patterns. And then we're gonna go with some specific details with regards to the pivotal aspect of what we consider to be digital trust. So obviously, just following a panel where we all heard some draconian activities, which were very, very well founded, by the way, with regards to the vulnerability of these devices. Now, this survey, amongst the bazillion that are out there today, points out it was 1,600 organizations, large and small, included in this, and 46% said high risk to business operations due to data security challenges. Right, sort of reemphasizes, if not exemplifies, some of the points that were just raised in the prior presentation. 25% of the surveyed folks also said, compliance with regulatory constraints is also a risk to business operations. So today we're going to kind of hopefully straddle some of those topics, certainly in a 45-minute to 50-minute discussion, not go into too much detail, but enough to entice, if not give an appetizer for some more detail. Now, our COE at the IoT community is committed and focused on collaboration. I love the comments that Guy led with Eric and others about cooperation. All right, now, we consider cooperation a very important part of business, so you're going to hear a lot about open source today, open standards, creating things that will allow scale to occur and move away from proprietary solutions. And we think proprietary solutions, as I mentioned last night during the Slammy Award to Glyph, are part of the problem, right? Because once you get vendor lock-in, just like today, if you are a user of anything on the internet, if you have a digital presence today, you are xyz@domain.com. If that domain owner decides they don't want you anymore, you didn't pay your bill, or they just don't like you, they delete your xxx.domain.com at domain.com, you no longer have a digital identity. Right, think about that, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about self-sovereign identity in a second here, but first and foremost, to move away from a little bit about the bad side, there's a good side. Right? The massive decentralization of industry is obvious, right? It's all about the data, the value of the data, real-time data, localized, personalized. Think about healthcare, for example, right? Think about context about my health through wearables. It's an exploding part. Remote physiological monitoring is a big part of what's going on in the IT practical application world. And that is of value to not only the physicians, the medical practices, and the other institutions that are either seeking to research but also to you yourself, right? Because contextual care, localized data, something that means something to me, relative to whether, the efficacy of a vaccine, the vigilance around a pharmaceutical that I have to take, or because of a disease I may have, you really want to have that localized real-time data available. And it's starting to emerge. Chronic disease treatment patterns and so on are also moving forward. However, organizations are actually struggling, even though it's purported to be a $1 trillion opportunity, right, the performance results are kind of mixed. And the chart here on the side sort of attempts to depict it. Oftentimes, people are having problems with interoperability. You think about the highly decentralized architecture that typifies, an edge or an IoT environment, right? You've instead of having, a few places with 100 servers, right? You've got hundreds, if not thousands, of places with a few servers. So, basically, what you're looking at is a highly complex set of architectures. The protocols necessary to maintain connectivity, to communicate, and to protect are now much more complex. You would argue also your attack surfaces are expanded. The number or the volume of attack or vulnerability vectors is also increased, exponentially because of the inherent architecture here. What we see is, a key opportunity to kind of get onto the bottom level, not at the firmware level, although that's part of it, and we'll get to that in a second, but really get to the bottom of it. We believe that the key to bringing the value to your organization's hands, or your stakeholders, right, is digital identity. It's a fundamental aspect. Most people connote digital identity to personal identity. I may have actually led you on to that when I talked about, the XXX at domain.com. Digital identity is also about the things. Identifying uniquely, protecting uniquely devices, right? As an identified actor in your architecture, in your solution, right? And the permissions that that machine has or doesn't have. Think about it. We have, I think that it's been reported that there are 43 billion internet-connected devices out there right now. So, it's an exploding market. And the report that I read also said by next year, we're looking at 56 billion connected devices. So, this is an exploding marketplace where people are trying to capture this value that's at the forefront, right? $1 trillion opportunity, and also competitive advantage, being not just the first, but the best penetrator into this market. So a few things that we'd like to kind of talk about from a trending perspective. The first and foremost is comprehensive protocols, trust protocols. And there's a lot of great technologies that are now evolving to be part of that protocol. You've got address space isolation, you've got zero knowledge proofing, you've got zero trust architectures, passwordless systems, and digital identity, which I've actually identified separately in the third item here. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But the idea here is to go after this as a comprehensive model. There's not one silver bullet that's going to solve the problem in our experience. And if people would like to argue, I would love to learn from that debate. So moving forward, you've got to take a look at, again, a comprehensive approach. A number of technologies put together in an architecture that's viable and durable, right? But yet also protects the transmission, the presentation, the access controls of the data at the edge. All right, so the second thing we're going to talk about is, if I could read it, that would be great. What's the second thing? Digital wallets, absolutely. Digital wallets. Who has a wallet on their phone, right? So I think there's 4 billion wallets out there now. That's what they say. Now, a wallet is more than just a phone, right, for payment, right? And that's typically the use case that people are kind of familiar with. Payments done through your wallet. You go to your Starbucks, you click on the thing, you get your coffee, and you move on. But wallets are also a machine or a piece of code, a containered code, right? And if you talk about 4 billion, moving to 5.6 billion, just to kind of put that at scale, if it were wallets on a phone, that's about 5.6 is about 65% of the global population. So this thing is expanding dramatically, right? Again, attack surface, right? Vulnerability vectors, all being exposed. Now, the folks that are deploying, mostly financial institutions right now, deploying these wallets, ostensibly are doing it for payments, right? Because people are kind of used to that now, and it's gaining momentum. It's the cool thing to do. But security is a big problem. But they're continuing to move forward with deployments of wallets because we believe the real race is on to control digital identity. Right? Digital identity being, pull out your wallet now, you've got your license, you have something else that uniquely identifies you. You may have a club card to get into your health club, or you may have something that you use, an insurance card, et cetera, et cetera. All of that stuff is in your physical wallet, and your digital wallet would be containing the same thing. Right? Now, in a business world, a self-contained piece of software that is a digital wallet will allow permissioned access to data, will conduct a transaction, smart contracts, if you will allow for you to share permissions with others, right, in a hierarchy, if you will. And Glyph is going to be able to talk to us about their solution for this, which is being accepted on a global scale. Very impressive stuff. All right, now what we're going to do is finalize here again what we consider to be the fulcrum of a very, very powerful and strong security protocol. Now, if you were able to bake into your architectures, your development solutions, a digital identity model that is open standard, right? So it's durable, it'll last, right? And it's portable, right? And it actually moves from device to device, or it has, obviously interoperability built into it. You're going to be able to create, we believe, the competitive advantage for your solutions. Everybody on this internet presentation and in this room here today is looking for a way to capture that $1 trillion of value that I just mentioned, the data, right? And then to leverage that for, obviously, either the greater good, perhaps, if not for profit, right? Self-sovereign identity puts the owner, the user, software and or the human, right, using identity credentials, right at the center of these permissions. Right? You're in control, so no longer would you be fall victim, perhaps, to others finding out your personal information or fraudulently intercepting your digital identity. Right? ted@xxx.com can be taken by somebody else, and they can do all kinds of things that I wouldn't normally do, right? Whether it be financial or otherwise. With a verifiable credential, right, that's protected by cryptography, right? You can actually utilize that where your personal information is either obfuscated, or pseudonyms are used, right? So you're not Ted DellaVecchia anymore. You are some sort of hashed piece of code that has permissions to do something, right, based on the issuer, right? The issuer says Ted could do this, Ted can't do that, et cetera. So if we move forward and start talking about, and self-sovereign identity does tend to have a connotation where people get a bit hyperbolic over. So it's more often referred to as decentralized identity. So we kind of take a look at, from a macro level, companies are having problems with this. They recognize they have problems with this, not just the compliance side, but the performance and long-term business value and operations, right, as they move more towards decentralized, protocol. We start to see that there are a number of solutions that in combination can provide a comprehensive trust protocol. And we also see, in our opinion, and I may not represent everybody's opinion on this board here, I think I do, perhaps I don't want to speak for them, but in Symbotix, my company, in our experience, we believe it is the foundation of success to bake a digital identity component into your programs. Today, we are very lucky to have Scott Perry, who is principal of digital trust at Shellman. Scott's a friend of mine, apparently grew up in the same neighborhood that we just found out recently together. And he and I were off to do some great stuff in ESG a couple of years ago, and we've maintained contact ever since. So Scott's going to take us through his experience. Now, this guy is a grown-up engineer. He may not be grown up, but he's an engineer. But he understands the technical dynamics. Yeah, he is a CPA, an auditor, an assessor, a smart guy, and he gets it, right? And he can help with governance programs that will bring that competitive advantage to light. Scott, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Let me take that. Appreciate it, Ted.
Yes, sir.
I'll take that. So just a little bit about my background so you can get a little bit of an orientation of how I'm coming to the internet trust problem. So I was involved with the internet architecture when it was brought up, so I'm showing my age right now, in the mid-90s. And the challenge was when we developed the internet architecture, we had holes in the architecture because we didn't realize that we had to bake in identity in the protocol. And we'll talk about the problem and now why we're suffering for it for the last 25 years, and now we're trying to solve a problem that we should have solved 25 years ago. And that is an immense problem, simple in discussion, and I'm going to describe it in 15 minutes, but amazingly difficult to actually implement because it involves cooperation globally, which is really difficult. So my background is I'm a web trust auditor, so I am one of 4 in the United States firms that audit certification authorities, that audit those that issue certificates that attach to websites. So I've been involved in internet trust, for the last 20 years, as well as digital identity. I am one of the auditors for the US federal PKI. So I'm very knowledgeable around cryptography from an audit standpoint. And what I'm going to talk about is how we can use cryptography to solve the internet trust problem. So it always starts, and this picture has been shown in many identity conferences. So this is new for me. It's a new environment where I'm talking to IoT people. But everything I'm going to talk to you has an IoT-related slant to it. And the problem starts with TCP/IP. The TCP/IP stack was built like the Pony Express. Okay? Transactions go from server, past to server, past to server, eventually to the end server, as Ted was mentioning, which could be maybe your email server, where they'll unpack it and say, okay, let me see, in my registry, where can I dump that particular transaction? And it's up to me that I had to verify that you are who you say you are, and sometimes I really didn't. I could just say you get an account and it goes to that. So there's no authenticity at the end part to get a transaction. You didn't have to prove that you are who you say you are to get transactions. And that's a problem, okay? And so in the stack, now we have to retrofit putting identity in the stacks, in the protocol stack, so that we could uniquely identify transactions going from point to point, the end person, okay? So the cartoon that is shown here was presented in the 1990s. It still is relevant today. On the internet, nobody knows that you're a dog, because you are anonymous on the internet, and that is a problem. You get presented to you every day with people that you do not trust. You cannot verify the source of their transactions, and that is a significant problem. And does that relate to IoT? It absolutely does, because right now, on the internet, nobody knows you're a bot. Nobody knows that the presentation that you're presenting could be a human person, or it could be a deep fake, it could be machine generated, or it could be an imposter. Matter of fact, it was funny, I just came from an internet conference where they were always talking about, there was Tom Hanks saying, don't listen to this particular video, it's not me, okay? But I'm gonna share with you, using cryptography, how we can have better confidence on the source of the transactions. So it starts with 3 components, and it starts with an identifier, a verifiable credential, and governance. And this is the new URL, a decentralized identifier, a unique identifier that's not controlled by a central body. It's issued and it is attached to cryptography keys, private key that you protect and public keys that you make available. And when you make it available, it can verify that anything that you use with your private key actually came from you and nobody else, okay? As long as you can protect that private key. And so the decentralized identifier is now a W3C standard. You can look that up. And now there are many methods to resolve this identifier to a DID document, which has your public key and other metadata attached to that identifier, okay? So that now, that string of data can now create the information needed to hold accountable of transactions to each other. Simple thing, there's 184 DID methods, which when you lock into it, it'll go to a variety of different sources. And this, the one that I had just mentioned, it actually goes to an IoT blockchain, Occam. And I would look at them because they are implementing IoT systems using DIDs, or decentralized identifiers. Now, a lot of the conversations that I'm having are around human identity, and there is advancements in the world around using this technology. There was a lot of fanfare last week about the EU implementing AI standards, but they're also implementing a new digital identity standard in the EU, and that's where it's going to have its greatest playing field in a standard called eIDAS 2.0, where they're really, putting together the standards through wallets and through digital identifiers and transactions that would be appropriate for that jurisdiction. So, what about traditional PKI? I've made my business on that for the last 20 years. And that was the reason why I got involved in this mission over 8 years ago. It's over 8 years ago, and we're just getting started. Because if you have digital certificates, they expire, they're centrally issued, and you have to depend on them. We want to break away from the central management of digital identity. And it's expensive, and it's very difficult. There's one into actually provision. I got my digital identity by a certification authority, and I tried to use it in another place. It was incredibly difficult because we don't have that interoperability. This platform will have the interoperability that's needed for trust to happen from ecosystem to ecosystem, from place to place, as long as we have the governance attached to it, and we're going to talk about that. And so PKI will exist. We're actually working in an organization that I am a steering committee member called the Trust Over IP Foundation. We'll talk more about that, which are developing some of the architectural standards around this. And we realize that the traditional PKI needs to exist, at least for a while, and so there will be a hybrid method around that. But in essence, there's a place for PKI, but in this world, for the value of the interoperability, I view that the traditional PKI for these types of things will eventually go away. So, next piece, we just did the DID. Now we do the real meat, which is called a verifiable claim. Once I have a key pair attached to my identity, with my key pair, I can encapsulate anything, any source, any claim, anything, and it can be attached to me and only me. Now, if it's an IoT device, I've been listening to all of your presentations. There's tons of different types of really important information that come from IoT devices, and all of those can be verified that it actually came from that IoT device, which right now in the marketplace you really can't do. And some of those, in some cases, it's going to be really important. If you look at the higher and more important IoT devices, wouldn't you want to know that a transaction like this actually came from the source? Ted, you're experiencing a stroke. Okay, you want to know that that's not a fake message.
I hate when that happens.
Exactly. The temperature of the nuclear core is above acceptable levels. Don't you want to know that that actually is a real statement? How about the drone operating in this jurisdiction has not been successfully registered? I've actually been working on that. I don't know, a number of years ago, there was a drone in Heathrow Airport, and that caused ICAO and FAA to come up with standards around trying to put a identifier in the drones and have it registered and have it authorized so that we wouldn't see a situation where we would have to strike down a drone because it was weaponized or not registered. the video you are watching originates from the White House. You want to know that the source of the videos that you're watching are not deep-faked, that they're truly coming from the source that is asserting that. Perishable human tissue has maintained viable temperature ranges during transport. And this is the sensitivity of some of the IoT devices. We're depending on the validation of the source of that information. How about no one has tampered with chips installed on this astronaut spacesuit, okay? So as we are starting to use more and more transactions that are highly dependent on our survival and critical infrastructure, we want validation that these transactions actually came from the source of them. So the third piece is really, how do you create an ecosystem of trust? So when a transaction comes from one source and was issued by an identifier that was issued by one ecosystem, that we could rely it in another ecosystem. Easiest one on the human side is we're proliferating now more mobile driver's license, and they're using this technology. So they're being issued by states and countries, but the TSA is dependent on the validation of the identity on those driver's license to get you on an airplane, okay? So they need to understand the governance associated with the issuance of that credential in the state, so I could use it for my context and my use in boarding a plane. So we need to have rules associated in the issuance of these credentials so that they can be transparent as well as to be relied upon in the context that others need. So we need to have issuers and we need to have governance frameworks established on the issuance of these set of credentials, and we need to have them transparent, and we need to have also rules associated with verifiers and rules associated with what goes into those that are issuing these types of credentials so that we can create what's called a trust registry around that. So it involves governance. And this is my call to the IoT community. Okay, we had just heard a presentation about the call to action for the IoT community. We have sets of credentials, verifiable claims that are made by a variety of different industries within IoT that can be consolidated and created in a governance framework that says we're going to issue these claims associated with IoT devices, okay, that are issued according to these rules. How do you get the rules? Starts with a risk assessment. We've talked a little bit about risk assessment here. You know, you're going to have different rules associated with items that are less meaningful, like temperature issuers, than some of the other more egregious type of IoT devices that are dealing with life and critical infrastructure. So you need to do a risk assessment, and those that are higher risk need to have more of a governance structure attached to it. And so risk assessment's done, and Carla's going to talk about that. I worked with her on her risk assessment, and that drives the rules for what needs to be established for all players in an ecosystem, the issuers and the verifiers and the trust registries that have the list of authorized participants in this environment. And then you bring in trust assurance. Our organizations, our actors, meeting the requirements of the governance framework that has been developed using certification and accreditation schemes, which I've been very active in being a part of, especially in this environment that's just taking off. And then we find out if players are meeting the needs or if there are deficiencies, and that goes back into a risk assessment. So we need, and the biggest part, I think, the technology is just about solved. We're actually developing a new protocol that's going to sit alongside of IP6 and TSCP called the Trust Spanning Protocol. We're working on how do you put encapsulated digital identity in the internet protocol. And so that's where we're going. We're going to solve the technology problem. I can tell you that millions of credentials are being issued today and are making it, but we don't have complete standards. And we need governance, and we need oversight, and we need those pieces that are familiar to lots of different types of schemes that have been around for quite a while, but we need it in this environment. So I want to finish with just a couple of thoughts around resources. If this is new to you, if this is interesting to you, I would recommend that you look at the book on the right. It's called Self-Sovereign Identity. As Ted had mentioned, that name has interesting connotations, but there are 50 authors, I was privileged to be one of them, that talk about a wide variety of different topics around this new technology. And this book was actually used and reviewed by the leaders in the country of Bhutan. Of all places, I had to look it up in the map. They have transformed their entire country because they're all getting digital identities. Every single one, they're going to get a digital identity. They're going to get a smartphone that has a wallet that can contain their digital identity, and they can use it for a wide variety of government services. And they are the best test bed that I could ever think of. Brilliant, done beautifully, and done very quickly and cheaply. And so I would really look into what Bhutan has done around digital identity, because that's a great model. Look at eIDAS on the bottom left. Look at the resources that the Trust Over IP Foundation has. And I would highly recommend, if you have any questions or comments or such, please contact me and we can talk further. And I look forward to the comments of my peers on talking about this technology and how we can use it in this environment.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much. Your experience shows, and we were privileged to have your comments here. So we're going to move from formal prepared remarks into a panel discussion, which we've kind of formed some questions just to kind of get the dialogue going. So let me start off, Carla, with give us a general understanding of Glyph, your business model, and if you wouldn't mind, go into a little bit of detail with the legal entity identifier.
Sure, thank you, Ted. So transport ourselves back to 2008, the global financial crisis. At that particular point in time, the financial regulators worldwide needed to figure out, especially starting in the US, what went wrong and who was responsible for what positions, so they could calibrate what happened, who was responsible for transactions and exposures to each other, and then form a response in order to be able to figure out what to do. But what they found was there was no common international level identifier for an organization that would allow, even sometimes within an organization itself, or companies across the street, or even globally, for regulators to be able to talk about positions and to figure out that they were talking about the same organization. And so a couple of years later, in 2010 actually, the regulators decided to come forward and ask the world to be able to help them. This paper came from the United States regulators first, asking for a standard international level legal entity identifier, and that's what LEI stands for, so that they could use that in order to be able to deal with issues for the next financial crisis, in effect. So while the LEI had its beginnings in the financial markets and for financial exposures, the standard was actually developed as an ISO standard, and that's when I got involved. And it was developed as an ISO standard that was broader than just financial services or to be used by financial firms and their clients, which forms the basis for how we get to be able to adapt it into the decentralized identity or organizational identity world that the verifiable LEI or the VLEI can step into at this particular point. Glyph is a small organization. Part of picking the standard was also implementing the standard. The global regulators got together, chose the governance model, chose where the foundation was going to be established, what our responsibilities were. It's formed as a Swiss not-for-profit organization, operating office in Frankfurt, and was put in charge of managing or being the keeper of a global repository that was free to all users, of all owners of LEIs and reference data associated with those organizations. A distinguishing factor of the LEI is the fact that we have governance put in place for when an LEI is issued. We have accredited partners that actually go out and they validate that that organization actually exists and validate every piece of published data that actually goes into the global LEI system. And this is a distinguishing factor for this global level identifier and also in contrast to most proprietary identifier solutions.
Thank you very much, Carla. First, thank you for being here, and again, congratulations on Glyph. Not only being the Center of Excellence choice for the SLAMI Award, but the public also chose Glyph, so there's a lot of confidence that you're going to be part of the hierarchy of change that's much necessary. Moving on, Corey, thanks for being here. Great to meet you in person. Corey and I have been part of our Center of Excellence here for a couple of years now, Corey being from Red Hat. And we haven't met in person, so today
this is the first time.
Chance to do that. So thanks for being here, and we're lucky to have you. So I mentioned the Open Wallet Foundation, talking about removing intermediaries. Scott referred, and still on the screen, the trust over IP. Coming from Red Hat, let me kind of tap into your experience and knowledge about the open source movement, digital trust in general, and your views vis-a-vis those elements.
Sure. Let me give a little context around where I operate right now. So within Red Hat, I'm actually in the sales organization. I work with customers or enterprises to talk about AI, actually, and how they're going to integrate certain solutions together or build a platform for that. So trust is one of those things. I think a friend asked me, they're like, you're in sales? And I was like, yes. They're like, you're too honest. And I was like, thanks. So yeah, trust is one of those things. I think when I'm talking to customers and when I hear the things that they're trying to do, there's a lot of integrations, there's a lot of IoT. And so some of the industries I talk to are around manufacturing, government agencies in North America. Lots of these groups are trying to figure out what that means. Like, what does governance mean in some of these areas that you discussed? And normally I'm in the weeds with technical, but today, with what you said today, actually reminds me that there's a huge element that is human. Like, we may figure out the technology to do identity, but it's still going to take us another 40 years to convince everyone that they want to do it. And I've heard different people speaking today, and coming from Red Hat, so you probably know, we operate in open source. Like, we believe in that. That is a core principle. And the one thing I'd invite anyone that's here today or listening to this is to realize you can collaborate. Like, we can go on the battlefield, we'll end up there at some point, but we need to collaborate because there's a benefit to everyone, especially in this area. Because technology is easy, humans are difficult. That's what it's going to come down to. And we need to help show the value of these things in a way that helps people to adopt it. And I think that's the bigger challenge that we see. So when I work in open source, it's herding cats that are probably on fire. That's open source. But it's great, it's fun, it's exciting. But you have to present that value to the human element and appeal to that in order to get that technology adopted. So that's I guess less technical, but one of the things.
No, that's fascinating, in my opinion. So let me give you a scenario and further probe your thoughts here. So a healthcare situation, right? I think actually it was a recent hospital breach. I forgot where it was, but I mean, they're coming out almost daily, if not more than once a day. And that's simply because the model today is centralizing with an intermediary, being an electronic health record holder, centralizing personal information attached to your health, right? Your SOCH, your address, the location of your children, whatever, right? All put together with whether or not you have a hangnail or something, right? Or a disease, to be more serious. Do you have that same argument with regards to convincing humans? You know, let's just say if my personal data were, you know, fraudulently accessed, not that I've got anything to hide, I really don't care if they know I have a fingernail that's broken, but the point is, you know, my personal information, however, is important. And the fact that healthcare has traditionally or forever kind of married those elements, do you think it would be easier as we move forward if we were able to articulate to the lay world the value of moving to something like verifiable credentials or other elements of digital trust, you know, kind of moving away from that intermediary central honeypot situation? Do you think we can motivate people?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to approach that. One thing that you reminded me of is there's also a generational difference. So if we're talking again about more the human element, there's a difference in what is considered privacy. Like, privacy is not the same as it was 50 years ago. Like, if you ask someone who defines privacy from those eras to today, they don't care about certain things as much today. It's a generational change. And so that's even that definition of what is private is evolving. And how do you, like in healthcare, ideally, you have to look at incentives. So everybody has different incentives. And that's where you get at the heart of adoption, is realizing, are people incentivized in the right way? Does the regulation create incentives that drive the behavior? Same with open source. Like, why in the world would you have all these people contributing to something that doesn't necessarily pay them, at least directly, right? But it rewards them in some way, and there's an incentive to get them to collaborate. So those are complex questions, and sometimes they're easy, sometimes a little more complicated. So it really depends on the group. I think if there's the key that I would say is oversimplified, is we need to be better listeners. We sometimes solve the problems. We get to a solutioning stage, and we need to move back to listening and understanding really why the behavior is not changing. Because we've probably solved the problem. I was hoping today, like, we would have flying cars. Like, growing up, that's what I was expecting. We might have the technology for it, but we can't. We've got regulation. Like, good luck flying a car. I mean, I don't trust people driving a car sometimes. Yeah. So the same thing is, like, we really need to listen. We need to be attentive and collaborative as much as possible. So
Terrific perspectives. Thank you. So Oscar De Leon is a new member of our COE, just as in the last maybe, 5 weeks, 6 weeks?
5 weeks, yeah.
But, you know, just in meeting him early on, through introductions from Kevin, who leads this IoT community, his passion is evident. And I immediately offered, and he accepted the vice chair of our COE. So, Oscar, you're an expert, so thank you for being here. And also thank you for being my partner. You know, so you're an expert in OT, right? We heard of some excellent comments just prior to this, which was a great lead-in, by the way, Guy. You know, give us an opinion of what's going on, and maybe perhaps exemplify further what you know, the former panel was talking about, you know, in terms of what your clients are seeing and how CDW is approaching them.
Sure. So, I mean, in OT, one of the things that actually, you know, you talk about trust. There's actually a mistrust between IT and OT. Every time you go to a customer, I mean, just start with that. You know, just start talking about that, right? The first thing you hear is, oh, I'm in operational technology. I don't really care about all this other stuff the IT guys wants to do. All they want to do is they want to prevent me from running my plant, right? And the perfect example of that is I used to work in a company that I used to make high-end robotics, and one of the controllers was actually a PC. We used to run all the mechatronics calculations, all of the movements, in a real-time OS that was running alongside Windows in a PC. Well, every time we sold that thing, we never called it a PC, we called it a controller, because if we called it a PC, it went under the IT, IT needed to control that, and that was a no-no for them, and it was like, no, if you call it a PC, we're not buying it. So this is kind of the situation that you end up with, trying to convince, I act as a mediator most of the times. I think that I have an engineering degree, but somehow I think that I'm in psychiatry because I end up talking to customers. We run an IoT shop for them, and we bring all the different people from all the different groups together, right? So we bring people from the operational side of the house, we bring people from the IT side of the house, we bring people from the actual operational side, but on the IT, the people that use the data to do prediction of what the sales is going to be, that kind of thing, right? And we put them all in a room, and we try to basically run something where they can use the data that is getting produced out of their operational technologies into their IT and the rest of the people in that room, that they can consume that data, they can utilize it to improve the business. And we usually come up with a ton of ideas, and this is where you get people to collaborate. And the thing to do that, you talked about herding cats. Well, that's exactly the same. So we basically we run a shop, and we basically put some kind of a way to evaluate the ideas, and we come up with the best ideas and the ones that actually are the easiest to implement, because there's a cost of implementation. And so this is the kind of things that we're talking about. And in digital identity, is super important for us, because one of the main problems with IoT is exactly as a deployment. If I had digital identity that I could be verifiable, it could be plug and play. But I don't have that. In reality, I don't have that. I have to.
Yet.
Exactly. Not yet. No, exactly. So that's the problem that right now I have. Every time I'm going to replace something, somebody has to touch it. Certificates expire. So let's say I have an IoT device here, and I have another IoT device as a backup. Remember the guys before said, what happens if all my things are break? Well, if I have a backup already programmed, I can bring it out and stick it in there, right? Not a lot of people do that, but there's some critical manufacturing facilities that actually do that. Guess what? If that thing is using a certificate, and that certificate is over 3 years old, it's not plug and play anymore. It won't work. So now somebody has to go touch it. So it's not. So that's basically what I run into.
Now, it's interesting. So we kind of shared a couple of questions. I haven't asked them yet of the panelists, but just a couple of opening remarks that I've offered and tossed softballs to my colleagues here. We've kind of gone down the human side of things, and it's very interesting that's come into play. So kind of maybe teasing that out a little further, I'm going to ask Scott a question. I'm not going to use the blockchain word, because vis-a-vis my comment a second ago about going further in the human side, pushing aside the Bitcoin sideshow, clown show, I should say, that occurred kind of broke the confidence, if you will, from a confidence level of a technology that can really help. Scott, what's your thought about DLT, distributed ledger technology? It's sort of a more generic term, but better flavor, if you will. What's your thought about the role of DLT in a comprehensive protocol?
So I've been tracking, blockchain DLT since it was, put out in the marketplace. And, my first view and my continued view is that it creates control. It has immutable records. I mean, that's not something that we had before, where we had cryptographically, confidence that records have not been changed in a database, okay? And the challenge that exists is the governance and the abuse of blockchains, okay? So, you know, in the cryptocurrency world, because I get asked a lot about where cryptocurrency standards are and all that, and even in the challenges with FTX and Binance and all that, that had nothing to do with the technology. That had to do with the governance, and it had to do with the abuse. And I always view that internet is a mirror of society, okay? You're gonna have your good apples, you're gonna have your bad apples. If there's a chance for greed, they're gonna take it, okay? So don't expect it to be, you know, the grand solution for it, but for what it is, it creates real value. I mean, we've seen, even though it's not required to have DIDs on a blockchain, there is benefits for that because you put it on a blockchain. First of all, it's immutable. Second of all, it has great redundancy because of all of the nodes in the network that are keeping it sustainable and available. Because if you have a DID and you want it to verify, it has to be available. So those attributes of trust really can be used in great ways in a variety of different applications, you know, especially in IoT. I mean, IoT, there's some great opportunities for that in supply chain and such. So let's not throw away the technology. Let's look at how we can apply it better with the constructs of governance and decentralized redundancies that it has.
Here. I love that. You know, I think it does have strong play architecturally because of its elegance handling distributed data sources, right? Taking a longitudinal look across a wide plane of things that are perhaps scattered and seemingly disintegrated, like health records. So thank you for the comments there. Carla, Glyph has just recently announced, I think it's pretty recent, the VLEI. Now I know LEI has achieved, is it ISO certification? What are the plans or thoughts about, you know, transcending into what is the VLEI to begin with, and then how do you transition forward, setting a new standard for credential in that domain?
Sure. So I'd like to actually start with a few comments. Ted, you brought up our Social Security numbers in healthcare.
Yep.
And Scott, you brought up mobile driver's licenses. And you talked about governance. And you talked about knowing about issuance. So a driver's license is not proof of my identity, it's proof that I have the right to drive a car. Social Security number was not made to be my bank account number or proving my identity when I call my insurance company. So the first thing that Glyph did was stick to our knitting, in effect. We used what I stopped my last comments on, the fact that we had the identity and the existence of an organization validated and given a standard code with a certain amount of reference data that was published to the world as our starting point. And we defined our purpose for the verifiable LEI or the VLEI as delivering a digital solution for organizational identity. And we define organizational identity in the context of the VLEI as being able to prove your identity of your organization and the people who represent your organization outside of your organization. Now, I know that this also works inside of your organization as well, but this is where we started to solve the decentralized identity problem. And we also wanted to improve what was out there. We already heard about the fact that digital certificates have been around forever, and they're likely to be around for quite some time more. But we took some of our lessons from the self-sovereign identity community. Although that focused on individuals and individuals' identity, what we did was we took a look at what we had and what we wanted to deliver. We wanted to be able to issue verifiable credentials that could take the identifier, the LEI that we had, put it inside a data container that could be verified in a decentralized manner But because of the meaning and the governance around that identifier and the way that it had been issued, could be verified all the way back to the organization itself and all the way back to Glyph to prove that that validation had been done on that organization. And so that's the first kind of credential that we issue to, well, Glyph doesn't issue directly to the VLEIs, but that's another story. So that first is an organizational level credential that has this validated piece of information in there called the LEI. The second thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to be able to deliver verifiable decentralized identity for people that act on behalf of companies and people who act on behalf of organizations. Because companies don't act on their own. People act on their behalf, and they're given certain rights and responsibilities and authority, delegated authority, that needs to be verified if you're going to trust that the engagement with that organization. So we created a second kind of credential called role credentials. And we relate three concepts there: the organization that is represented by its LEI, the person by their legal identity, and the role, whether it's an officer's role or whether it's a functional role. So two different flavors of these role credentials. And that's basically what we delivered. And the governance that we have around the VLEI, including the risk assessment and the trust assurance framework and everything like that, but distinct documents that actually go through the requirements for issuing and revoking these credentials, because they don't have expiration dates. They're designed in order to be able to be associated with a company, a person in a particular role, as long as those facts are still valid. And what we did was we defined a way to put the work into making sure that the credential went to the right person who was identified by their organization to get one, and also to put guardrails around when that credential should be revoked. And then also user guidelines in order to be able to say, when you get one of these, verify, don't trust. So taking on the mantra of the zero trust architecture. And so that's what we did.
Excellent, thank you. Scott, you worked with Carla to get that ISO certification? Or?
No, I just worked with her on her governance
Okay.
framework.
Can you kind of expand further on what you just said?
So, you know, the concept that she's saying is it's simple, but if you put it in practice globally, then I, as a CEO of a certain company, will have certain rights, and maybe the banking institutions will want the CEO to enact my private key to sign certain documents, and that will become valid in the marketplace. And so I'll have to get an LEI, I'll have to get a VLEI role credential as a CEO. Just imagine how much power that is, okay? That you can automatically verify that it came from the CEO of a company. So it's, you know, and I've been in the challenge with Glyph and trying to present a universal type utility, basically, to a variety of different use cases. But if you implement certain use cases, they can be globally powerful, you know, because it's not just the US, this is this is the Dun & Bradstreet of the world. If I'm doing a banking transaction from the US to a Botswanan company, I want to know that that Botswanan company is legitimate. And if they get an LEI, I have confidence that they've gone through the vetting to prove to me that they are a legitimate company, that I can now deal with a global trading partner. Very powerful.
Excellent. So we've got just a couple more minutes to go here. And unless you want us to start talking about AI, which you may be tired of hearing of, please ask a question. Anybody has that for an incentive? Anybody have a question very quickly for our panelists? Come on, you got so much experience, the wealth of experience on the board here. Okay, well, I'm getting waved off anyway. It's like the Gong Show here, but you know, we really appreciate, seriously, we really appreciate your attention. If you have further questions, reach out to these experts, and or me, if you wish. We'd love to have further dialogue. This is something we're very passionate about, we believe in heavily, and we thank you for your support going forward. Good day.
Thank you very much.